everybody, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome if you are new here, and welcome to all the new subscribers who just joined the channel in the last week. Your subscriptions are and your views are very much appreciated, as are everybody's. I'm Andrea M, and this is Unsolved Down Under. And before I start today's case, I have to give a massive trigger warning for disturbing content and distressing content, because today's unsolved case involves crimes committed against children. So if you don't want to hear this, you might not want to watch this video, but if you do, I'm just letting you know that the content can be quite distressing, and the individual who was the perpetrator in this case to this day has never been caught, and nobody knows who he is. But before we get into all that, I just have a couple of things to get out of the way first. If you are not subscribed to the channel yet and you're coming back week after week, please do consider subscribing, as it helps me out a lot in the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you can leave a like on the video and a comment, it just helps YouTube to notice me a little bit more and helps to push my videos out to a wider audience. So that's how YouTube works, if you don't already know that. So if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Not only does it help me out, but I would love to have you back, and as always, subscriptions are for free. You don't have to pay anything to subscribe to a channel. Also, I just wanted to give a plug for a little initiative here in the Clarence Valley, which is growing, and we want to help continue the growth. So if you're in the Clarence Valley area, then this is for you. And what I'm talking about is an initiative that is run by two amazing people and friends of mine, Pam Hatter Music and Jeff Paul Music, and it's called the Original Lounge. Now, where the public comes in with this one is they are trying to host an amazing event on the 29th of February. It's going to be a candlelight event with some amazing artists and some beautiful music already being sourced and decided upon for this amazing concert. Where do you come in, you ask? Well, this is what you need to do. If you have any old Christmas tree lights that are still working, any old fairy lights, any old battery-powered candles, wax candles that you don't want or you've got too many of and you're wondering what to do with, then the Original Sound Lounge wants your lights and candles so that they can pull off this amazing candlelight event. So all you have to do is round up all your old lights, candles and things that you don't need anymore, and you can drop them off to the Emporium in Skinner Street, South Grafton, 31 Skinner Street. Just go on in the big door at the front, wander past Grumpy's Cafe, down the hallway past Rustic Revivals where I work, and you'll find the KVC Creations Gallery. That is one of the drop-off points for the candles. Also, you can have a chat to Pam. She's usually there most days a week, or her lovely husband Kane. And he has got some amazing new stock in the gallery at the moment as well. He has got some amazing canvases, new jewellery, and all of the things that make KVC Creations so amazing. So if you go to drop your candles off, you get the double value of KVC Creations. Then you also have our little shop at Rustic Revivals. You might want to pop into Grumpy's Cafe for a coffee and stay for some great music. There is also Ned's wonderful rock record shop, Irene, at the end of the hallway with her beautiful gallery as well. And that is the Emporium, and that is one of the places where you can drop off your candles. The other place is the Clarence Kitchen Collective, and I think it's across the road from the Emporium there in Skinner Street. But I'll include addresses, websites, Facebook pages in the description box below if you would like to help the Original Sound Lounge pull off this amazing concert that they are planning at the moment. And I am going to the concert, and I am going to hopefully film a little bit of it. I might have to just be a bit careful with the music content because copyright, but it's going to be an amazing night, and I'm hoping to film a little bit of it so you can see the beauty of this lovely candlelit event. So if you would love to help out with that, I will be linking everything in the description box below. That being said, let's get into today's video. And we went a little bit lighter last week. This week we are delving back into the black heart of Australia. So be prepared. And I will say, There is a news clip, if I can find it, I'm going to include in this video, and it is quite distressing, so be forewarned, and I will tell you before I'm going to put it in here. And this case is another horrible one. And the scary part is, as I said before, it belongs on Unsolved Down Under because it's never been solved. Nobody knows who the perpetrator is. No clues were left. Like, there was only minimal clues, but on the whole, the police were not left with very much to work with at all. And the case that we are covering today is the case of Mr. Cruel. And he was a masked child SAer who held Australia in the grip of fear, and he was never caught, as I've said. So let's just get into today's case. Starting in 1987, the suburbs of Melbourne were terrorised by an offender known as Mr. Cruel, whose attacks were so carefully planned that he left not a single trace of forensic evidence behind. On the morning of August 22, 1987, a masked man known only as Mr. Cruel broke into a family's home in the quiet suburb of Lower Plenty on the outskirts of Melbourne, Australia. He forced both parents onto their stomachs, bound their hands and feet, and locked them in a closet. Then he tied their 7-year-old son to a bed, and he would go on to SA their 11-year-old daughter. He then cut the phone lines and left. The intruder then embarked on a sadistic abduction spree that saw 4 Melbourne children disappear until 1991. But no one could stop Mr. Cruel because nobody could identify him. And no one has ever to this day. Mr. Cruel's first attack on that morning in 1987 established him as a boogeyman who would strike fear into the parents and children alike of Melbourne for over a decade. After the twisted attack on the family in Lower Plenty, the police were called and the investigation began. The family told them that after he had taken a pane from their living room window, the balaclava-clad criminal made his way to the parents' bedroom. He was brandishing a knife in one hand and he was holding a gun in the other. To subdue them, the intruder utilised a type of knot that is most commonly used by sailors, or at least those with some nautical experience. However, the type of knot is not listed. Over the course of the next 2 hours, Mr. Cruel SA'd their 11-year-old daughter. When he finally left, he pilfered a box of records and a blue jacket. The little girl was eventually able to tell police that the intruder used the family phone to call someone else during one of his breaks in the attack against her. From what the girl heard, this call was a threatening one, with the man demanding the person on the other end of the line to move their children or they would be next. And he referred to this unknown person as Bozo. But the police checked the family's phone records and there was no record of this call whatsoever. So it would later become clear that this was Mr. Cruel planting a red herring to purposely confuse the investigators. He would successfully throw them off his scent for years. A second horrifying abduction outside Melbourne was to follow. It was over a year before Mr. Cruel struck again. This time it was just days after Christmas in 1988, when John Wills, his wife and their 4 daughters were fast asleep in their Ringwood area home, a couple of miles southeast of where the previous crime had taken place. Wearing dark blue overalls and a dark ski mask, Mr. Cruel broke into the Wills' home and held a gun to John Wills' head. As before, he clutched a knife in his other hand and told the parents to roll onto their stomachs, where again he would bound and gag them. The intruder assured the Wills that he was only there for money, but, as he did in the first case, he methodically cut the phone lines and made his way into the bedroom where the 4 Wills daughters all slept. Addressing 10-year-old Sharon Wills by name, the man quickly woke her up, blindfolded and gagged her, then picked up a few items of her clothing and left the house with her. After freeing himself and noticing the phone lines were cut, John Wills rushed next door to the neighbour's house to use the phone to call the police. However, Mr. Cruel was long gone, and so was Sharon. But 18 hours later, a woman stumbled upon a tiny figure standing on a street corner just after midnight. Dressed in green garbage bags, it was Sharon Wills. As Sharon Wills was reunited with her family, she gave police some startling clues as to who her attacker might be. Now, Wills was blindfolded through her assault, so she was unable to give a full physical description of Mr. Cruel, but she did recall how shortly before letting her go, the suspect made sure to give her a very thorough bathing. He not only washed off any forensic evidence he had left behind, but he had also clipped her fingernails and toenails, brushed and flossed her teeth. So he's very thorough in cleaning up the crime scene, including his victim, so that none of his DNA was left behind. And even at that stage, I don't think the DNA forensic testing was what it is now. So he was really thinking ahead, this guy. And he was obviously stalking these victims and their families for months, like weeks or months, in preparation for these abductions, because you have to think it was a very long space of time between the first and the second. So this guy's highly organised, definitely a serial offender, and he's probably done it before somewhere else. There's no evidence to say that there are other attacks similar to this in other parts of Australia, but it just makes me wonder, because this guy's very organised for somebody who only just started this in 1987. So it wouldn't surprise me if there had been things happen earlier in the piece and people just didn't talk about it, because that was kind of a thing in the earlier years. So here in Australia, the people wouldn't talk about things that happened. They kind of sweep it under the rug, or they were too afraid to come forward, whatever. So no, nothing's ever been said to that effect that this happened in this case. It's just my wonderings and musings over it. Could he have done this before? And I think for someone who's so organised, I think maybe, yeah. So the investigators quickly tied this incident to the previous in Lower Plenty, and a domain of fear and apprehension was beginning to take shape in the suburbs of Melbourne. Mr. Cruel's next victim would be 13-year-old Nicola Linus. Nicola was attacked for 50 hours by the masked abductor. Mr. Cruel was striking for a third time on July 3, 1990 in the suburb of Canterbury, Victoria, which is west of Ringwood and south of Lower Plenty, the first two locations. Here resided the Linus family, a well-off English family who'd been renting a house along the prestigious Monomeath Avenue. This distinguished neighbourhood had been home to plenty of Australian politicians and also public officials in its time as a distinguished neighbourhood, and it made people feel that it was a very safe area to live in. On the day that it all happened, Brian and Rosemary were attending a farewell party and left their two daughters home alone. Then, just before midnight, 15-year-old Fiona and 13-year-old Nicola were woken by the ranting, commanding orders of a masked intruder. Armed with his usual gun and knife, he instructed Nicola to go into another room to pick up her Presbyterian Ladies' College uniform while he tied Fiona up in her bed. Mr. Cruel informed Fiona that her father would need to pay him $25,000 for Nicola's safe return. He then took off with the young victim in the family's rental car, and the car was parked in the driveway. Mr. Cruel drove about a half a mile down the road, parked, and then transferred to another vehicle. So as I said, he's highly, highly organised. Just 20 minutes after the abduction, Brian and Rosemary Linus returned home, where they found 15-year-old Fiona tied to her bed with a ransom message. And then, just a few days later, Nicola was dropped off at an electricity station not far from her home, and this is important for later. She was fully dressed, wrapped in a blanket, and blindfolded. When she was confident that Mr. Cruel had driven away, she removed the blindfold and shakily made her way to a nearby house for help. And this was around about 2 a.m. in the morning, and she was able to phone her parents. Nicola was able to offer the investigators some details that were vital to the investigation. Most notable among them was a rough estimate of the attacker's height, which would stand at around 5'8". She also revealed that the suspect possibly had reddish-brown hair at the time. Some details of her ordeal were more horrifying. She revealed that throughout her time in captivity, she was forced to lay down in a neck brace contraption fastened to the abductor's bed. How insidious is this man already? And this would restrain Nicola while he would abuse her. So, this is another one of these cases. I really hope this perpetrator has been caught and locked up on some other charge, or that maybe he has become deceased in the time since these crimes were committed, because this is absolutely insidious. Stalking and watching little girls for months and then abducting them, abusing them, and then just dropping them off home like nothing ever happened. And you have to think, how do these children ever have a normal life? How do their families ever have a normal life after this? It just defies description or even contemplating. And I will say right now that my heart and my prayers go out to all the families and the children involved in this case, because it's just absolutely terrible. Nicola would also tell investigators that she heard him speaking aloud to another person, but she never heard a response. The investigators weren't entirely sure whether this meant there was an accomplice, but it's more likely that it was another of Mr. Cruel's many extremely cruel red herrings. Months after the Linus family moved back to England, Nicola told investigators that she heard a low-flying aircraft while in the abductor's home. Investigators thought that this may mean the suspect lived in the surrounding vicinity of the nearby Tullamarine Airport, more than likely in its direct flight path. However, there still wasn't enough evidence to make an arrest, and Mr. Cruel's worst deeds were yet to come. So his final and most depraved crime was the abduction and murder of Carmine Chan. And this is the very distressing, even more distressing part of the case. I am going to include a news clip of her mother appealing for Carmen's safe return, and it is distressing, so if you want to skip over that part, feel free. But I feel it's important to the case so that you can see the impact that these monsters have on these families. It's just, I have no words.
Police and Phyllis Chan were hoping that he just had this much amount of human decency and that he would watch that and think, yes, I'll release her.
Please! Release my daughter!
And what made the crime against Carmine Chan even worse than the first few crimes that he committed against the other children was that Carmen was never returned to her parents alive. Carmen's mother believed that it's because she would have fought way too hard against her attacker. So on April 13 of 1991, Mr. Cruel broke into the home of John and Phyllis Chan in the affluent Templestowe district of Victoria. That night they trusted their 13-year-old daughter Carmen to watch over her two younger siblings. It seemed Mr. Cruel knew this, as detectives believed he would stake out his victims for weeks or even months ahead of time, learning their habits, learning their movements. At roughly 8:40 that evening, Carmen and one of her sisters headed to the kitchen to make some food, and they were startled by this monster, Mr. Cruel, in his balaclava and a grey-green sweatsuit. "I only want your money," Mr. Cruel lied to the three girls, forcing the two younger siblings into Carmen's wardrobe. He claimed he wanted Carmen by herself to show him where the money was, and he pushed a bed in front of the closet and locked the two younger sisters in as he made his escape. However, minutes later, the two frightened little girls managed to actually push the wardrobe doors open and immediately called their father at the restaurant. By the time the police arrived, they knew what to expect. They'd been to enough of Mr. Cruel's crime scenes to know what had taken place. Police appealed for the return of Carmen Chan. Investigators found a note written in large bold letters on Phyllis Chan's Toyota Camry shortly after the abduction. It read, "Pay back Asian drug dealer. More to come." But after combing John Chan's background, this proved to be just another one of Mr. Cruel's sadistic red herrings. Days later, the Chans posted an encrypted letter in the local newspaper, using a cipher that Carmen Chan would have been able to decrypt. They offered a hefty $300,000 ransom in exchange for the safe return of their daughter. Carmen Chan's abduction triggered one of the largest manhunts in Australian history, known now as Operation Spectrum. It was a multi-million-dollar undertaking that devoured tens of thousands of police man-hours, alongside the many thousands more of volunteer hours. Sadly, Carmen would never be reunited with her family. Nearly 1 year after Carmen's abduction, on April 9 of 1992, a gentleman walking his dog in the close-by area of Thomastown happened upon a fully decomposed skeleton of a child. This was eventually revealed to be Carmen Chan. The autopsy revealed that Carmen, and I give a trigger warning right here, this is extremely distressing content, what happened to this little girl. So if you want to zip forward a couple of minutes, feel free. "13-year-old Carmen Chan had been shot 3 times in her head execution style, probably not long after the abduction. And this is the part of the case that just, I can't even fathom the terror that little girl was going through right before she died. I think the devil is saving a special place in hell for you, Mr. Cruel. At least I hope so. Theories have swirled as to why Mr. Cruel murdered Carmen when he released all of his other victims. As we explored before, Carmen's mother theorises it was because her daughter was extremely stubborn and would have fought likely against her attacker, and she would have fought hard against him. She likely learned too much about him for him to let her go. Operation Spectrum continued for the next few years for the search for Mr. Cruel. The 40-member task force investigated over 20,000 potential suspects, collected over tens of thousands of tips from the public, and searched over 30,000 houses in the hopes of turning over even a single clue. But they never did. Spectrum was eventually shelved for good in 1994, and with it went any potential leads on the Mr. Cruel case. In 2022, however, long after the operations task force disbanded, reports surfaced that an unidentified criminal had come forward some 20 years earlier and told detectives that he actually knew who Mr. Cruel was. The man claimed that the culprit was a known criminal named Norman Leung Lee, whose house supposedly matched what the victim said about Mr. Cruel's home, but the trail ran cold from there. That same year, an investigator named Mike King went public with a theory that Mr. Cruel's attacks were targeted to areas that had electrical substations nearby. So remember I said earlier that the link to the electricity was important for later. This is that important link. And I have watched also a documentary put forward by my favourite journalist Liz Hayes and her amazing show Under Investigation. And she does a very in-depth video about Mr. Cruel. And if I can find it again, I will link it in the description box below for you guys, because the way Liz does her Under Investigation videos, it was a TV show as well, but the way these are made is very, very clever, very detailed, and she actually has people that were involved in the case on the show, and they talk about the evidence and other things that were links to this case. So if you would like to go and watch the amazing Liz Hayes and her presentation of this case, which is a lot more in-depth than mine, I like to leave just a few things out when I do my videos, because I don't want to take away from the professionals that do these cases when they do such an amazing job, and there is so much work that goes into them. So if you want an even more in-depth look at this case, I would recommend you to go and watch Liz Hayes under investigation. She's available here on YouTube, and I'll link it for you below in the description box. Not to say like I don't leave things out that are like the main information for the cases, but I don't want to like parrot everything that's on somebody else's video, because it's not fair to them and their work, and I want my video to be mine. So that's why I do mine in my way, and I just allow other people to do their videos in their way. So that way you get a lot of different opinions and different angles to look at a case with if you follow other people and look at their presentations. And Liz Hayes, I have to say, is one of the best. She is amazing. So after they looked at the angle of the culprit maybe posing as a utility worker, the case again would run cold. And that's pretty much where we leave the case of Mr. Cruel. To this day, he has never been identified. However, if watching this video has triggered a memory for you, or maybe put somebody you know under suspicion, and when I say that, I mean with a viable validation that, oh my God, this person could possibly have been this perpetrator. Or if you have proof, or if you have something that would still be helpful to the police and to these poor families, especially the family of Carmen Chen, in catching this man, or at least if he is perhaps deceased by now, giving the families answers to who did this to their children at last, you can call Crime Stoppers on 1-800-333-000, and you may remain anonymous if you so wish. I would really like to see somebody held accountable for these atrocious crimes against these poor little girls. It's absolutely horrendous. And the fact that his last known victim was killed by him, he needs to be held accountable, especially for that. And as always, my heart and my prayers goes out to all the families involved in this case, as I said before, especially the Chans. I am so very, very sorry that your little girl didn't come home alive. And that's why I do these cases. I've said this before. It's to remember the victims so that they're never forgotten. And cases like this, with any luck, do never happen again. And that's where we leave today's case. So once again, thank you guys so much for sticking with me. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for subscribing. It means a lot to me. You are all so loved and appreciated. And I guess I'll be seeing you all very, very soon in my next video. And stay tuned, as I will try and get some video footage of the amazing event that is going to be held by the Original Sound Lounge with the candlelight. And as always, if you want to contribute to that, check the description box below. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Please stay safe, and I'll see you all again very soon. Bye for now.